this is, I think, the secret is focusing on moments, realizing that our own lives were most impacted by, at first with music, by moments that happen in pieces or songs or whatever we hear.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
Speak peace like a Buddhist.
A unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Leavitt.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Rachel. You are indeed listening to that great podcast in the sky, And If Love Remains, and I am its messenger, Mike Leavitt. Welcome. Really happy to have everybody listening. I'm excited to have, once again, my co-host on so many of these episodes, the king of keys, the prince of pianism.
Here we go.
The liege of legato, Elias-Axel Pettersson. Welcome,
That's
man.
a new one. That's a new one. Thanks, Mike.
You got to add to them. I got to keep that whatever left, right side, whatever side keeps the creation going. It's going.
I like it.
Good. Well, it's great to have you, man. And this is I'm very excited to have Ben on. I know you and I have talked about having him on, and he's a friend of yours, and I'm a great admirer of what he's doing in his show. Ben Laude, he's the host of the Chopin Podcast. He also has his own YouTube channel, Ben Laude, Laude, and tell us a little bit about yourself. I love, Elias knows I love superhero origin stories. So come on, Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I hope I have one.
And please, well, I think the important thing here is to tell some embarrassing stories about Elias, since you guys know each other.
I thought that's what we're doing for the whole hour, right?
Right.
Oh, gosh.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying my name correctly, Ben Laude. Not even my old piano teacher says my name correctly. He's known it for decades. I think really the whole point, here's my superhero story. The whole point of my podcast and my YouTube channel is to teach the world how to say my name and how my family says my name. So I've been spelling it for people, saying it correctly. So
by the way, I did notice on one of your shorts, I think you have a tag, Ben Laude, Lawdy.
Yeah.
Which is the phonetic spelling. But now some people think that's just how it's spelled. And somebody who fixed my sprinklers the other day, I guess, looked me up on Instagram, and he wrote the invoice to Ben Lawdy. So I can't win here.
Oh man,
it's okay.
So, by the way, where does that name come from? Where are you from? And
laude, to praise, to honor, summa cum laude. So obviously Latin, but through Italian, and who knows? I'm sure my Italian great grandfather didn't say Lawdy, and whoever in my family decided that's how it should be pronounced. That's unfortunate because it sure doesn't look that way. But in any case.
Hey, well, it's important to be unique. When you become, famous like yourself, you got to have something that everybody can think about. And if it's your name, it's your name. I mean, what can you say?
I suppose. I don't know about famous.
He's got more than that, for sure. The musician. Anyway, tell us about like how you grew up with music. I know a little bit about it, but our listeners don't. How you came to the piano and all that jazz.
Well, I mean, I divide my life in two parts: before I met Elias and after I met Elias. No, okay. Jokes aside,
don't we all?
Jokes aside, there is actually some truth to that because I met Elias at the sort of peak of my piano obsession, my actually teenage piano obsession. I was 19, and it had been probably 5 or 6 years strong of going hard and deep into the world of classical piano in my particular way. There is no one way. And you meet other people like Elias at summer camps, and they show you other things you didn't think of. And that's part of this whole world of discovery. And it's part of the reason I think I'm doing what I'm doing is to also help contribute to a community where people can discuss these things, because for the most part, we pianists, especially in America, I think classical pianists were raised in very isolated circumstances. You go to your neighborhood piano lesson. It's not like even the other classical instruments where you're handed a flute in middle school band or orchestra, and at least you're in a group of people. Or you play the violin and you have to play in ensembles and you're used to chamber music and these things. The only one comparable might be classical guitar. They're a pretty lonely bunch, but even they get in circles and play together more than pianists
Right.
do.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's mostly a lonely craft, and it certainly was for me. And my obsession was totally improbable. I just happened to sort of stumble on the feelings that I felt for this music, and I didn't have anybody to share it with. And so it was actually a combination of the early internet and certain early summer camp experiences, beginning when I was 16 and into my early 20s, that had a profound effect on me. And actually, Elias was certainly part of that. So, but yeah,
We met
so
in
that's
Prague.
kind of how things began. Yeah.
Yeah. We met at a festival. Actually, I studied with your teacher at the time. I took a couple lessons and also with Logan Skelton and some others. And that was actually a very formative summer festival for me. It was in Prague. And even though it was short, 10 or 11 days, I saw a lot more of the piano world that I just hadn't seen before, and connected with a lot of people there. And Ben was one. We kind of struck us up a friendship and kept it ever since. It's been 20 years or something. So pretty cool.
Sure.
But we've gone our different ways and done our different things. And now Ben's doing all these amazing things, which we're definitely going to touch upon today. So
For sure.
yeah.
I want to touch again, a kind of, you talked about the loneliness of the piano. I think specifically the classical piano, because, I play a lot of jazz. I play a lot of in groups and things, and you have that camaraderie, you have that kind of integration, you have that where you're actually trying to communicate with one another in a improvised setting or in some sort of setting. You're trying to communicate for an audience, and you just don't have that with specifically the piano solo repertoire. It's just not there. And so to find, and on top of that, you add like the culture, which really, you talk about people who are interested in art music, classical music, the kind of music, the great piano works, you're starting to whittle down the population. So I understand that, and it's exciting. I think that's where, like your show, the Chopin podcast, hopefully my show a little bit, and other online forums can help bring us together.
Yeah, there is something unnatural historically about the solo piano repertoire. I mean, music since time immemorial was a communal phenomenon of singing or dancing together. Even the roots of Western music in the sort of polyphonic structures that arose in European church settings, those were groups of people combining their voices. And so it was only through the rise of technology and ultimately political changes in the Industrial Revolution, the rise of the middle class, all these kinds of things, that even create or produce an isolated individual who has a piano, who can now embody what used to be singing polyphonic voices in their own 10 fingers at one time by themselves. And even then, in the 19th century, it wasn't so lonely. The piano was a very social instrument. It was the social domestic instrument.
Well, if you wanted to hear a Beethoven symphony, and you weren't close to one of the great orchestras around, what did you do? You had to play it on a piano. Somebody had to play a score.
But it's interesting that such an incredible wealth of solo music was composed, but I think it's only this isolation I've been describing really only, I think it really intensified and became a thing worth talking about in the 20th century with recording, and especially not just recording and playback technologies, because in the days of LP, you got to play it in a room. There's probably somebody else in the room who you're bothering, and you're listening together more often than not. It's when we started sticking it in our ears and walking around by ourselves. It's
true.
really in our own lifetimes that this this privatization of musical experience has occurred. But I don't want to just be negative about it, because that is exactly the experience, that is exactly the world in which I discovered music, was intense private listening experiences of recordings. It wasn't going to concert halls. I still hate going to classical concerts. I can't stand it.
That's funny.
I haven't been to a single one I've ever liked. I don't care how well they're playing. I just don't like these people around me. It's upsetting. I can't focus. I can't enjoy anything. The lights are always slightly too bright. I'm a kind of a Gouldian on that front. I mean, he said he prefers movies because it's very dark. At least you can't see the people around you, and it's just you in the cinema. You know, I wish maybe I would have liked a Sviatoslav Richter concert where it's just him and the light bulb on the piano and nothing else.
Mhm.
But
Right.
I like the privacy aspect. That's how I was first raised on it. So I don't want to slam that element. Elias, I wonder what you think. If you had more public experiences that got you into piano, or these kind of more private ones with recordings like I did.
I tend to like public performances. The only thing that I have against them nowadays is the audience and the expectations and just the culture around it. So it's very hard for me to go to a classical concert, symphonic or otherwise, or chamber, and really enjoy the whole thing and be moved by it. Of course, you know, I'm expecting certain things too in repertoire that I know, and so maybe nothing quite meets those expectations. But you know, I just went to a concert last weekend, and I was pleasantly surprised how much I just enjoyed the whole thing. It was a varied program, things you don't hear in concert that often, and I just thought, wow, you know, I wasn't thinking I was going to like it as much as I did. And, but I've been known to fall asleep at some of my favorite things. I'm just like, I love it. It's great playing. It's whatever, but I'm just tired, and maybe I can't be super focused on it. I can still enjoy it and respect it, but yeah,
I'm exaggerating.
I do like the concert atmosphere.
Yeah, I'm exaggerating some, and of course I've been
Sure.
to some good concerts. But what was formative was the recording relationship I have with recordings. But I will say this: have you ever tried to show somebody a movie that you really like and you've seen before, but they haven't?
Yeah.
It's that experience of anxiety that, what are they thinking? Yeah. That's both ruining it for you and making them uncomfortable at the same time. That's how I feel at classical concerts. It's hard to get rid of that feeling of what do other people think of this? And so it deflects my attention from what's going on, you know?
Well, I feel I often go to concerts. I mean, I've gone to plenty alone, but either with friends or colleagues who are other pianists. And now, of course, with my wife, I mean, you have a similar experience. You know, you can go to concerts with somebody who's also a fine trained musician. And so you can kind of share in your mutual knowledge and like or dislike, or even, you know, disagreements about how somebody might have interpreted something. And that can be nice. It spurns on some good conversations.
For sure.
But at least I feel like I'm not alone in my feelings or my thoughts, because I often do feel isolated, you know, at a concert, whether they're great and people don't realize just how great, or they're not that great and they're famous or whatever, and people are like, oh, it's wonderful. I'm like, no, they're not. You know, that annoys me too, because then I get very cynical about the whole world. And it's just, is it a meritocracy anymore? I mean, we know it isn't, but do people know how to judge this music anymore? No. But hopefully what we're doing is training people and showing them what is possible. Anyway.
I think that's one of the reasons I think I started this particular podcast, is that I wanted to talk to people who enjoyed great art or great science or great things, whatever, literature, greatness. And I wanted to understand, you know, why this stuff is important. Like, why is it important for somebody to, you know, understand, you know, a Chopin prelude? You know, why is it important for somebody to listen to it and enjoy it, but not just listen to it, but understand what went into it, and what, not just the performance, but also the music itself. And, you know, obviously, you know, without becoming an expert and just diving in as, you know, a full-time job or something, you can only get so far. But I think everybody can, you know, expand their horizon of what is important and what is great, and why this stuff matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was going to ask if we can go into also the idea of this whole platform and in sharing our musical experiences. And I know, Ben, you've of course you've gone from the concert stage and you have a plethora of degrees from wonderful universities. I think it's easy for you to understate those, but just for our listeners, Ben is a highly trained pianist and has degrees and concerts to prove it. But going from something like that to teaching and some of the other things you've done, working with dancers, and now I know you were with Tone Base for a while, and now your own podcast. I mean, you've done so many things, it seems, professionally and integrated that with your life experience. I wonder if we can jump off at some point and talk about that.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. I lived in New York for 9 increasingly dreadful years of my life, and I managed to escape before I perished. So I'm kind of lucky, but it was good that I was there because I went through a lot. I probably nearly quit music a number of times. I had the worst version of imposter syndrome at Juilliard, and I got into every other possible, field of human study. I got interested in all kinds of other subjects besides music, and that led me to neglect music a lot. To my detriment early on at Juilliard. And I'm lucky that I rediscovered it later, but maybe that's the hero's journey. I don't know if I'm the hero, but that there was a journey, a kind of coming back to and rediscovering something that I once, that I originally had a big passion for in high school and college. But my early graduate school experience was one of pain, of physical pain, of really not being able to deal with the fact that I have this chronic scapular dyskinesia in my right shoulder, which was flaring up pretty bad at the time for the first time. And, when you walk into Juilliard, and I had a teacher, Mati Raikallio, who I adore, but he was giving me repertoire lists that I could barely even begin to manage. And I remember it was like Beethoven Opus 7, this big E flat early sonata that I like, and I was trying to play. I mean, there was just certain figurations in the first movement that was just destroying me. I couldn't do them anymore. And I was like, if I can't even play one movement of Beethoven sonata, how am I going to last here? And so I went off and started reading all kinds of radical politics and doing everything besides practicing. But somehow I managed to stay at Juilliard. And I think this is what led me to be interested in all these other forms of life and art and human activity and studying history, philosophy. I was very interested in different critiques of society from different angles and trying to understand our culture, and managing my cynicism with some amount of activity, of trying to create new forms of culture. So I mean, I started a student newspaper when I was at Juilliard because I was depressed that it didn't have one, like every other institution of higher ed seems to. Like, wow. I went to college, there's a student run newspaper where you talk shit about the president, and on every other page. And isn't that just part of the college experience? And so all Juilliard had was a kind of, kind of what looked like a newspaper, but it was really just a newsletter for donors. So I got students together. We made The Yard, as in the jail yard, for a year and a half. And it was awesome. And it was really fun. And of course, like many things I've started, it didn't continue because I just went on to the next thing. But those kinds of things were my attempt to, I think, combine my growing disillusionment with the world and even with classical music. I mean, I didn't see any future for the art form or for myself in it. Mm-hmm. And so here I was trying to bring whatever skills and interests I had and that I had developed in other domains back into that world, back into Juilliard. And I've done this in a number of different ways. So I do think that was the beginning of my efforts to utilize, especially forms of media, but also my skill sets and my knowledge and my, just the things I've studied and been interested in over the years, bring them back to the piano, to this otherwise seemingly insulated world of pure abstract music, and share with hopefully increasingly popular audiences and broader audiences the fact that this is not some rarefied thing, but actually what's so special about piano is that inside of these abstract, sound worlds is every form of human life and human experience and feeling and history and culture. And so I infuse my videos with analogies and metaphors and references to pop culture and references to everyday life and these kinds of things. And I think that's really important. Even if at the end of the day, I really value the sort of purely musical experience too. I think it's impossible to regard it as something that is purely outside of the world. I think it got in a lot of trouble for being removed from the world, and that's why people look at it as like, what does it even mean? Why do people spend their time on this? What does that have to do with any of our lives? And so I was lucky with tone bass, which we can get to in a second, but I feel like I've said enough, at least making that statement,
I think that's important. And in fact, it's really interesting. I was just watching one of your interviews with Alan Walker, really fascinating interview you had. And you had this back and forth about Chopin and about program music and pure music and this whole, and his ideas about it. And you were I could tell you were trying to, propose the idea that, even though he thought of it, Chopin saying he thought of it as, this pure music, that something was influencing it. Something in his mind that was coming out. There's a reason why, this music was coming out. I think that's a really interesting, music is, there's a old saying, I guess, about musicals. You talk until the emotion gets so high you have to sing, and then when the emotion gets so high that you have to dance, and then I think the ultimate is the emotion gets so high there's nothing left but the music. And to me, that's kind of what music does. It says absolutely what can't be said. Anyway, I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about that conversation you had with him.
That's right. Well, that's exactly the great romantic slogan about music, and which is what led a lot of people, cultural critics, musicians, artists, thinkers in the 19th century to regard music as the highest form of art, was that in their words, it was ineffable. It expressed something that couldn't be expressed in words. And that's what allowed it to rise above the other arts, which always were in some sense tethered to the mundane world, either with pictures, representations, or words, language, kind of things that we deal with in our ordinary life. And I think Alan Walker's speaking to that, both because I do think he believes it as an old-fashioned romantic, but also just as a responsible biographer. He's trying to report on what he believed, I think rightly, is that Chopin thought, which was something along the lines of that absolute music ideal. And obviously there were debates in the 19th century, but I think some of the interesting theories about this is that even those who wrote program music on some level believed in absolute music. Program music ends up being something that is a social phenomenon. I mean, literally, it was something you wrote in a program on a concert to try to get people to understand what was going on at a Berlioz symphony to begin with. So, but those end up being kind of highfalutin debates. I think the interesting thing to take away from it is that here is this form of art that was regarded as the highest form of art not too long ago, and it's specifically instrumental music, and specifically for the reasons you just described, that it seemed to capture what we can't otherwise within the limitations of our language, and then that kind of went away. I mean, the 20th century was so devastating and complicated in so many ways that music. There is no one history of music in the 20th century. There's 10,000 histories. It just went in so many different directions. But I don't care if it's old fashioned. I like to hold on to something of that 19th century ideal, and then not just about music, but even about other forms of art, even if forms of art that are representational. They don't actually have to be pictures of the ordinary world. Our language doesn't have to be. It can also rise above that which is merely expressed when we exchange our ideas in mundane. And I think it's really valuable because we live in a world in which there's so much banality and so much. I don't need to talk about it. It's just crushing us every day, right? I mean, It's just inanity after technological form of of limiting our humanity, to put it in very stark terms. And I can think of one incredible thing that is an antidote to that, both personally, just individually, but also potentially maybe in larger collective ways. And that is these heightened ecstatic experiences that we have with great art, specifically great music. And I think great works of art, music have been undervalued and underrepresented in our culture precisely because it's a culture of spectacle. It's a culture that relies on the image, on on language and abuses of language, and the music that is promoted. I love all forms of popular music, but notice that it's not absolute instrumental musical experiences that it can be enlivening and edifying and elevating.
Right.
So I think this has been not lost so much as it has been relegated and pushed into a corner because it just doesn't resonate with the dominant forms of media, politics, and society. So I think for that very reason, and ironically, using technologies like the internet and YouTube, we can try to bring back into and inject back into this world of banality and spectacle something like a heightened spiritual experience that I think all three of us and many people listening have felt with music.
Man, I think that's so right on. I just a couple of points on what you're saying. Number one, I think, we talked about how piano repertoire, specifically the piano solo piano, is such a lonely thing, but in the same way, like everybody experiences music in a very individual way. And, I like what you're saying about how music can enliven or enlarge the culture as a whole. But I think that only happens, one person at a time. Mm-hmm. And it's important that we become like evangelists of this great art and show people, like, when you hear something beautiful, when you hear, a Beethoven concerto or something, just it's undeniably sublime and it's there. You can't deny it. And there's nothing that can take away from that. And so the daily course of our life, where, as you said, we get bombarded from all sides and nothing means anything. Well, there's something that means something. Yeah. There's some beauty that is there that you can't take away.
You have to be careful with that, though, Mike, because I believe all of that. And now just hearing you say it and reflecting back on what I said, I think this is a contradiction built into the history of classical music. This is what got us in trouble too, is saying things like Beethoven's masterpieces are undeniably great. Yeah. Because just go show Very that and say that to people. And then they feel intimidated. They feel condescended to, potentially, depending on the context. They feel like they're stupid for not getting it. And
yeah, so that's a great point.
I've thought a lot about this because it's a conundrum. And I don't really blame those who've been charged with elitism over the years, because I think it's just a trap that's really hard to avoid when you really are taken away by this art form and believe in its power. You can and you want to evangelize for it. Well, you can sound like the preacher on the corner who nobody's listening to.
It's a fact.
So it's a real threat. I've thought about this a long time, because I remember in college I was convinced for a while. I was some kind of solipsist, or I don't even know. I mean, I believed I went through a phase of radical relativism, I suppose, where you couldn't make any objective claims about the greatness of any forms of art, because ultimately, how could you bear on my own private experience? Listen, you say this is great. Of course, I said all of that while still loving Chopin and Beethoven and Brahms and Bach, and thinking that on some level it's better than other things. So I was really struggling with this for a while, but I went through the relativist phase because I feel like I was assigned Rachmaninoff Fourth Concerto by Dr. Roux, who Elias knows, Bobby Roux, who we studied with in Prague when we were there together, and was my teacher at Rice. And I remember I had this thought, because I didn't get it at first, but I had the Michelangelo recording, which I thought was awesome. So I was actually pretty psyched about learning it. But I wondered, why isn't it as popular as the other ones? Is it because there's something objective about Rock 2 and Rock 3 that are just above and beyond Rock 4? And I started convincing myself that no, it's for whatever accidents of conditioning, and marketing, I suppose, have just led those pieces to be, and it could have been rock 4. And there's, looking back, it's like, well, I think there's ways of looking at the form and the kind of melodies that was used that can account for its popularity and the stuff. And also, if you follow my line of thinking too far, you can start saying that any throwing pots and pans together is a great masterpiece in someone's mind. And so but at least I flirted with radical relativism for a while, because I, on some level, was trying to respect the fact that other people listened to things differently than I did.
Mm-hmm.
But
Sure.
I remember I got to grad school and I was in Jerry Lowenthal's studio class, and somebody was talking about Brahms' B major trio, which Brahms revised later in his life. So it's an early piece, but it's also a later piece. And there, we still have the earlier one. I don't think it was fully burned. I think that we know something about that earlier piece and it's been recorded. And there was a debate going on about, well, how can you say that his revision is better than his original? There's debates like this with Rachmaninoff too, his second sonata,
Beethoven too,
which actually I think are more interesting debates than this one, because there's a good claim that the earlier one is better. But at least with the Brahms, we couldn't just say, well, he was older and he decided that was his final piece, that's why it's better. And so, with 20-year-olds, we're arguing amongst ourselves. And Jerry Lowenthal, who's probably thought about these things or been near these kinds of debates his whole life, just comes up and he says, well, the point is, you have to give your reasons. Whatever you think, give your reasons. And I remember thinking that at the time, I was like, wow, he really kind of shut down our argument, but I don't know, what exactly did he mean? I keep coming back to that over the years because I think he's exactly right. The answer to this question of, is music subjective? Is it objective? What it is, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Tell me what you're listening to. Show me what you hear. And then and this is what I do on YouTube. I want to do more of it. I want to say, listen to this. This is what I noticed. What did you notice? And now, and only now, does music break away from that stupid false dichotomy of everything is subjective or everything is objective. And we start creating a communal world, a world of discourse about sharing a world and sharing the same music that we're listening to. It's a process. It's something we have to make and continue to enlarge. It's a challenge for us, I think. And this is, I think, also a beautiful answer to that question, because it's a way of saying, well, yeah, if you don't do anything about it, music is purely subjective, or it's just objective sound, and, who cares, basically. And so shut up and just don't talk about it, But if we can start coming together around a community of listening and trying to hear what other people hear who otherwise we didn't understand why we liked that version of that piece, or we didn't even like this form of music or this style. Forget classical. It's all, any genre you listen to for the first time, from the outside, it all sounds the same, is what everybody says about any genre that they don't know. And you could say there's layers inside of that. So once you get inside of the world of classical piano, I just made this video about Yun-Chan Lim's recordings, and there's people who hate the pre-war golden age pianists because of the freedom can be sickening, right? It's too subjective. But there's people who can't stand the Pollinis of the world because it sounds cold and coldly objective. And now we're coming back to the exact same terms I was just talking about. But the point is, I tried to make a video. I was like, here's what they're doing. What do you think? Tell me and share. And I've started appreciating interpretations of piano music and other kinds of music and other kinds of art, other forms of life that I wouldn't have otherwise, because I joined that conversation, or I helped start the conversation, or whatever. And so I wonder what you guys think about that. Like, have you kind of dealt with these issues, Elias? And what do you think about this idea of, like, we just need to talk about it more,
I have so many thoughts with what you guys are saying. I'm trying to jot some things down, but one thing with the relativism, I think it's very important. I have a particularly hard time with that because I feel I'm so steeped in the traditions of classical piano, and I love it so much. But I also grew up, I don't have the same maybe jaded outlook on it as many do, because I played violin too. So I had that sort of camaraderie with my classical music experience that maybe some pianists didn't have, or some guitarists or whatnot. So I found a lot of solace and community and identity in my classical music making growing up, and a few other things, because I felt very ostracized in other ways. I wore glasses, I was very nerdy, whatnot. And so I just have this sort of love, and it kind of imbues me so much with that. But I've also gone through the questioning of like, well, why do I find, I'll take jazz as an example. No offense, Mike. But,
I take none.
like I've gone through stages of loving and hating jazz music, and sometimes at the same time. And when I grew up, I didn't hear a lot of it. It might have been on the radio, or, maybe my grandparents were listening to something, or it was a form of jazz. It was just sort of getting into pop music that was acceptable. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. That's fine. I love pop music, even though now I listen to 80s pop music or 70s pop music, which I grew up with. And I'm like, well, that's not as great as I remember, but at the same time, it's very nostalgic and meaningful. But with jazz, I would hear it and I would just put it off. I'm like, okay, I can't tell what these tunes are. They all, like you said, Ben, they all sound the same. And when I went to college, I got to hear a lot more live jazz. And my friends, I was in Rochester. I got to hear a lot of wonderful musicians at Eastman playing brass, and I just hadn't heard it like that before. Or there's a little club or like a coffee shop, and I got to hear little bands, 4 or 5 members doing some stuff in the afternoon and the evening. That live experience was so cool to me. And I thought, wow, I've been missing out on this my whole life. I love jazz. It's so neat. I still couldn't pick out what the tunes were. And now I listen to it and I'm like, gosh, I'm kind of bored again, because it's the same kind of theme, and it's repeated a lot, which is one thing I do and I don't like about pop music. But with jazz, it's kind of sort of embellished all the time. And I have my, I get this condescension in my mind and in my voice of, well, the jazz pianist can't do what a classical pianist can do. And Mike, you and I have talked
Which
about
is a fact.
stuff, and like, why don't they practice their
Yeah, but
skills
also
more?
vice
And then the jazz
versa.
Yeah, and then the jazz pianists say, well, so-and-so can't play jazz because they don't have the groove or the feeling. I'm like, what does that even mean?
Or the musical awareness to be able to improvise.
Or just improv. Yeah, I mean, I can't improv, but I feel if you could meld those worlds, the best of both, it would be great. You'd have an unstoppable jazz pianist, and you had a few of those types, like Oscar Peterson's or
Sure,
those types. But it's hard for me. So I'm in that stage now where I'm like, I kind of appreciate it. I appreciate some really great jazz musicians, but I can't listen to it for a really long time anymore. And maybe if I go to more live jazz shows, I'll come around to that. And the same can be said for some other musical, genres. Some I really like that I wouldn't think I would like. And others, I'm like, what is this? I can't do this.
Well, this also brings up the question of, at some point, we only live one lifetime, and we have to make a choice between, do I try to taste a little bit of every form of interesting culture, or do I pursue a few very deeply? Mm-hmm. And I'm more on the second. Mm-hmm. I believe in the second, because I think if we just get a smattering of I understood jazz for a little bit that one time, and here I feel like I understand all music a little bit. I think you're missing out on those incredible rewards that come from uncovering all the layers to a single art form. And we could extrapolate to other forms of life too. Like, you are a chess player, Elias. From the outside looking in, I look at chess and I see this incredible, beautiful world of interrelationships similar to music, of possibility, of genius, that you can see these lines, or that Chopin could have manifested those forms. There's some interesting similarities, I think, there. Yeah. But I haven't gone down the road of trying to get on the inside and knowing what it feels like to be able to, like a jazz player could when they hear a certain change and they know what to do with it, can just see the board and see line, and they just have the pleasure of having that emerge just from within you, from that experience. Yeah. I'll never get there. I'll never be able to dedicate myself to that. because I'm dedicating myself to other things. And that's okay.
But I will
still have the appreciation for it from the outside,
But I think that's where your conversation really, that community is so important, because I feel the same way. There's a lot of things that I have learned because Elias has gotten so deep with the things that he understands, and I've gotten deep in the things that I understand. Like, we can come together, and it's not that I'm going to ever experience it on the level that he is, but what I can do is I can appreciate where he's coming from, and I can really, I can enjoy, appreciate, and that brings a more, more life to my life. I think that's a really important thing. I agree with you, Ben. I think going deep is that allows you to go wide at some point.
It's interesting. I feel our culture, and I am a firm believer of really putting yourself and immersing yourself into something. But I feel the American culture is so much about try a little bit of everything. And there's a good side to that. We teach kids, and you think about trying to schedule a lesson and have a studio class. And then the parents are like, well, my kids got gymnastics, and they have swimming, then they have school, then they have homework, then they're in Chinese club. And then it's like, well, when are they ever practicing? When are they, you have to take this seriously. Otherwise, why are you taking private piano lessons with somebody with my experience? Just take it from a next door neighbor or something like that. But so I do like the idea of trying a lot of things, and I do want to experience as many things as I can. But the depth, the amount that you put in, you learn from yourself when you go into something is so important. And it's one of the reasons why when I grew up, this idea of a hobby, that term hobby, to me, it just doesn't resonate much. And Mike and I have talked about that. I don't know why, but everything I always did, I wanted to be, if not the best, one of the best, or at least competitive at it. And not to the stage, I had a friend in college who was a little bit more egotistical in his way of talking about it. But we talked about doing like cross-country skiing, because I grew up, half my family's Swedish. It's kind of in our blood. I just grew up skiing. And I said, oh, it's a joke. We were comparing. He said, oh, I grew up in, I think it was like Vermont or something. He skied a lot. And I said, oh, we should go skiing sometimes. He's like, well, I'm really good. I was like, okay. I mean, I'm pretty good too. So cool. Like, it's not a competition. We're going to have fun. And then we got into it, and he's like, well, we could compete. And I was like, I've never done a skiing competition. Whatever. But then he mentioned one. I was like, oh, well, let's do that. And he said, well, I never do one that I've won. I was like, okay, fine. Like, that's not the point. Sure, you've taken it very seriously and gotten to the highest level, but it's not about putting that to other people. It's about how much you've gained, how much experience you've learned from great masters that have maybe taught you. And so for me, yes, I have a competitive edge, but everything that I did, I wanted to do it well, because what's the point otherwise? Like, why would I put some effort into something and then it's just for fun? I feel that's a cop-out.
Yeah, that's okay. So just in the spirit of continuing our collective stream of consciousness all the way through this podcast, I don't know if there was something we were supposed to come back to, but I just want to keep riding on what Elias is saying.
We can go anywhere.
Yeah. I know, because I want to keep building off what you're saying now. It's like we're building a castle, but it's like this, and somehow it's all staying up, probably, hopefully, maybe it'll all come crashing down at the end. And if anyone's still listening, they'll be like, what would that?
Welcome to And If Love Remains, Ben.
Yeah. So, but competition versus doing something for its own sake. Another one of these false dichotomies, right?
Yeah.
Which for a long time I struggled with too. Yeah. Especially when you're in music, because we're all supposed to lament the evil competition, right. And here we are all doing them and interested in them and following them. But of course, there is a kind of romantic ideal, and occasionally you meet people like this, and many people say, I think with good reason, that somebody like a young kid like Yun-Chun Lim seems to embody this. He's somehow a competition winner, but doesn't do it for those reasons, And
right.
Maybe you think that's true, maybe you don't, but at least as an ideal, I love the idea that the competition winner is the one who wasn't competitive,
right?
Who was just so in love with the music, and so in love to the extent that they were comparing themselves, they were absorbing the world of recorded history of the piano, so that they could just learn its secrets and come up with their own way of talking about it and expressing themselves through it. And so I do think there is also a resolution or a way of resolving that dichotomy too, which is something like we are the most successful in competitive circumstances when we've kept our eye not on the prize, but on the object of our
means,
admiration and interest. And I mean, isn't that true in all forms of life?
Yeah.
You know, when you have a student who's doing it because, you know, they're thinking about playing better than somebody else, or they're doing it because they need to please their parents or their teacher, versus the much more incredible moments in lessons where they have an aha, like, oh, wow, I really like that.
Yeah.
And now they suddenly do it better for its own sake. But guess what? They have a competitive edge.
Right.
And so it's interesting to me that I'm sure, Elias, you've experienced this too. It was probably your success in competitive circumstances had to be related on some level to how much you loved and were fascinated internally by the own intrinsic interest of something. So I think these things can live together. They have to in our world. Yeah.
And I think it's also a lot of curiosity. I loved your interview, and I'm going to butcher it. I think is his name Ken Kendrick? Is that the 1990?
Kevin Kenner.
Kevin Kenner. Thank you. I mean, that's such a fascinating story that I wasn't aware of. But I think, like, to me, the most impressive thing about that entire interview was his genuine curiosity, humility, about the whole situation, where he was actually, you know, taking these critiques that I think a lot of people would have taken as just like, I can't believe this just happened to me. You know, and just so people know, like in 1990, there was no gold winner of the Chopin competition. The top person was Kevin, and he received a silver, which is such a bizarre thing, but that's what happened. But I think and he talks about how just that made him a stronger player and a better player. And to me, I think that's what we're getting at, is like, it's what do you bring to a competition, to the art, you know? And it's a modicum of humility, a bit of skill, and just a lot of hard work. And you can find a lot of joy and just, you know, being in that state of mind.
And it relates back to this idea of listening when people give their reasons and express details they heard in your playing. Because he was talking about a German critic who said that he didn't play with sensuality. And he went back to his teacher, and his teacher said, well, actually, he's right.
Yeah.
And first of all, I just think it's interesting that pianists can all be singing around agreeing that something is lacking sensuality.
Right.
Sounds. Tones lack sensuality. Yet we all know what that means somehow.
You know what that means, yeah.
But Kevin took it to heart, and it changed how he played over time. And later he played for the same critic, and the critic was amazed he ever said that about his own playing. So the point is, if he had been either stubborn, which plenty of musicians are, and they never grow, they never get better, they're not, like you said, they don't have the humility to accept that maybe the way they're doing something is not communicating as they think it might, or maybe they're just completely missing out on a whole dimension of the music that they could have been expressing. It leads to, if you're able to have that kind of humility, it leads to real growth and transformation in an individual. So imagine if, you know, you can create communities of people sharing this and, you know, keeping it fair. Don't let it get ugly. Doesn't need to get like, you know, I follow sports. I'm a sports guy. Like, it shouldn't get like sports debates which can be, I mean, these are millionaires. So you have talking heads really saying mean things about these people, and this person should be fired, or that person had the worst game of all time. But I would love to get to the point that, for example, at the next Clyburn competition or next Chopin competition, or I'm hosting the national competition in Miami in January. Maybe, is it possible? Could we try to bring some level of, not criticism in a negative sense, but articulating what we heard, and what was just played, and sharing that in a good-natured way with others, at the risk of possibly sometimes offending those who played it or who liked it, and maybe you didn't like it as much. That's really tricky. We don't want to offend people, and so we see very little criticism anymore. In classical music and art used to have a whole robust world of public criticism that was part of the world. It was part of a healthy. It's why sports are healthy, and they have lots of criticism internally to it.
Yeah.
And look, our world is in that sense not so healthy because we can't say anything critical about each other. So I wonder if we can't build together some trust so that we might be able to talk about people's playing in ways in which I can say, you know what, I wasn't convinced by that. And then somebody else said, I know what you mean, but I heard they were really going for a longer line. Or there can be a consensus that this performance was somewhat lackluster. And maybe that gets back to the pianist. And maybe they get better because of it. Maybe it's okay to express something on the surface negative if it's constructive, just like that critic did with Kevin Kinner, and it changed his life. So I think we need to bring this back into our art form, and it's going to require some risk taking, I think, on some level.
So if you look at things like Slonimsky, the lexicon of musical invective, and what a lot of critics said, I mean, back in the early 20th and 19th centuries, you had many critics going to concerts and writing about it. And they weren't always nice, but they had an ear for it. They said something that was useful. People could kind of learn from that criticism. It wasn't just a negative thing. And that whole, maybe criticism isn't the right word, discussion is, but I would love to bring more discussion back into our world.
Commentary.
Two things. I think back on the competition thing, like there is a healthy way to have a competition, and competition can be healthy. I mean, especially for kids that are maybe they're not motivated for something, but if they know they're going to have to play for someone or some judge or for an audience, it maybe gives them a little kick in the butt to practice a little bit and to listen to their teacher. Maybe playing under a stressful situation like a master class, and they hear the same thing from another teacher, it kind of rings a bell, or oh yeah, my teacher said the same thing. Maybe it's something I have to work on. If they have that self-realization. If not, it's just a good repetition for it. So I think there's a way to have healthy competition, and I think we're in a world where people are very aware of that. We've had so many scandals especially in certain piano competitions in the past. I mean, if you think of the 90s with Kevin Kenner, but if you go back to like Pogorelic, I mean, that was a huge scandal what happened with him, and Martha Argerich left the jury. So there are many things that happen in our world, probably because of a lot of egos and hurt feelings, and we can't hold the music in the highest esteem.
Those things are going to happen no matter what.
They're going to happen. Yeah,
that's inevitable. But how do you handle that? Yeah. And like, again, that becomes part of that conversation.
That discussion.
Okay,
yeah.
How do we enliven and grow this art that we love?
Well, it's really hard. And I think there's a very funny thing that happened, and also sad, at the Rubinstein competition a year or two ago. And Elias, you probably know what I'm talking about. I admire them for trying, because they're trying to address exactly what we're talking about. They're trying to bring to the audience, the followers of the competition, some level of transparency for what judges are thinking when they're reasoning about this person going on and this person's not. Mm-hmm. But here's was their solution to that. They brought the people who were eliminated on stage and to meet with the jury publicly.
Yeah.
And one by one have the jury articulate to their face what was lacking and missing in their playing.
That was a very weird, uncomfortable.
It was, I think, both traumatizing and, I remember just reading the comments, there was a comment by Jolt Bognar who said, this is really not the way to do this. Whatever else you're doing, this is bad. Can't be a good thing. And I agree with that, but I also... I know what they're trying to do, and I just think that's not the solution. And so I don't know what the solution is, but I think we want something more like what the Chopin competition has in Warsaw. Warsaw is a public, at that competition in particular, that's filled with amateur listeners who are expert listeners, and probably amateur pianists themselves. And it was even more this way in the past, especially when there were no fire codes and people were it was a mob inside in the 60s and 70s. If you look at the old tape, it must have been an incredible atmosphere. Every person in those halls, they didn't have phones in their pockets. And they were hanging on every note. Can you imagine being in that's the recital I want to go to, Elias. I haven't been to one like that. That's why I feel alienated, is because I don't feel this sense of collective camaraderie around every single sound we're hearing. And that's what we want. They have it there because they have national pride. They have a tradition around that. And still to this day, it's one of the best publics, I think, to play for, especially in that competition, especially Chopin. How can we build that? It's not going to happen right away with gimmicks like what the Rubinstein competition put out there. It can only happen slowly with 10, 100,000 times more people than just me doing something that is for the public and not just for so many musicians. We are just forced into the various corners of our world. So which I think is so cool that you guys are putting yourselves out there, creating forms of public discourse and consumption. And there needs to be more of that. Of course, we're pushed towards private, towards playing for rich people, playing in our little private gatherings, playing in rooms for 7 people. We get used to that, and then we get smug about it. We're like, yeah, nobody likes what we do. They just don't understand it. They don't understand how great it is. And we get that sort of elitist feeling. But we need to remember that actually this is a very humane, universalizing art form in the best sense, in the sense that anyone could have that magic moment with the music. You just have to find or create the right kinds of context for them to experience it. But it won't happen all at once. There's still going to be lots of alienated listening, and there's still going to be a lot of insularity. But I think little by little we can start to, push back on this and use the great irony of all this, using technologies, using social media, and try to transform that into a positive sense of social media and technologies that really create a social collective way of understanding, trusting each other, listening together, not always agreeing, but at least sharing the premise so that we can be elevated together in the experience of our forms, to put it in too many words.
I think also there's something about having moments like just specific moments that you can share, that you can experience together. You were right in the beginning. As somebody who's being introduced to classical music, it all sounds the same with any art, with any music, but specifically classical music. You all you hear is orchestra, or all you hear is these notes on a piano. You're not sure what to make of it. But if you can find moments of beauty, and I'm thinking, I keep coming back to my mind, and it's a weird, weird thought. But I think of these old Rush albums I would listen to as a kid, and I would have maybe 3 or 4 buddies over, and we would just literally sit on the floor listening to Rush Hemispheres, and we'd wait for this moment of this triangle ding. And it just made us just full of joy, just this whole thing. And there's moments in music like that we can. I'm also thinking about the review you just did. I'm sorry. Who was the
of Yun-Chan? Yeah.
Yes. And I listened to that and listening to how you were able to articulate some run coming down and how that was influenced by this, early 20th century pianist. To me, that was immensely beautiful. And when you can hear the difference, and people can, I think people can experience these little moments of beauty and then expand from there.
Just to build on that, and I'm curious what Elias thinks too. You're totally right. This is, I think, the secret is focusing on moments, realizing that our own lives were most impacted at first with music, by moments that happen in pieces or songs or whatever we hear. And it's kind of a theme in my podcast. I think the very first episode with the preludes, I'm I got into piano because of 4 bars from this one little Chopin prelude. And it wasn't even the whole prelude. It was one tiny place within this tiny prelude. And I can point back to so many just measures within passages of recordings I heard that lit a spark in me. And you're right. It makes, when you listen again, it doesn't mean that you're not listening to the rest of it. It means you're listening with an amount of anticipation for that moment. So you're actually hearing more, you're loving more of the details that build up to it, and then what comes after it as a result of it. And so here's one conclusion I would draw from, I think, the fact that we sort of agree on this. I think it's just true. Let's get rid of the program notes. Or not literally, but there's a program notes approach to trying to educate people about music, which tries to paint with really broad strokes and says, this is a great, historical figure, and here's biographical details, and they wrote all these pieces, and this piece you're about to hear is all of these things at once, and now I'm going to sit down and try to listen to that. Right. How am I supposed? What is it? Let's do the exact opposite. Here's my program note. About 2 minutes in, you're going to hear this one thing. Wait for that. The end.
Yeah.
And then it's like, whoa! I'm suddenly listening better because it's heightening my awareness, making me alert and vigilant as a listener. Elias, what do you think?
Couple thing, a lot of things, but I'm going to disagree a little bit, but then agree. So the whole program note approach, I first of all think is important. So I run a festival as well in New Mexico, and we've Mike and I have talked about it, and just putting on a festival. How do you relate to pianists that are coming and just the general public? And I think there are a few different ways, but one is writing program notes, but making them combine kind of what you're saying. So especially the older crowd, or just the non-classical crowd, they want to know, who is it they're listening to? Where does this come from? Some of the basics where they can just relate to that and say, oh, this Beethoven is from Germany. I just never, that's cool. Oh, he's from the 17 and 1800s. Okay, that kind of puts something into perspective. But the interesting thing is, well, listen to this first movement, how there are different sections and something comes back often. Listen for that repeated section that comes in the top register and then in the middle and then in the lower register. Maybe that gives them something to grab onto. And the other thing is, we always encourage any performers to talk about what they're playing. They can read the program notes and reiterate it, or they can bring some of that more personal experience into it. Hey, this movement is very difficult because it doesn't sound hard, but it's actually very technically hard in this way. And, listen for these figurations that come in, which are very hard to control, but just for people to latch onto that. Mm-hmm. But that also brings me to something we brought up a long time ago, and something we've discussed in many podcasts about how all of our personal experiences affect our listening, and what we hear, what we don't hear, what we're not capable of hearing, and I think, to tie into what you do, Ben, with your podcast, and what we're trying to do as well, is educate listeners in a way that's not condescending, but to show that, hey, this is how we've trained and we've learned to listen to this kind of music, what the expectation is, what the breaking of that expectation sometimes does and means. So you can hear it. One example I think of is when you analyze Yun-Chun Lim's Rachmaninoff Third Concerto from the competition. And there is something in, I believe, the first movement with a repeated D. Do you remember that? So I've heard it done before a little bit, but you kind of just pointed that out, like, how ridiculous is this in a way? But I don't think a lot of people would maybe know or realize that because they don't have the relative, they haven't listened to 50 other recordings of it. But you did talk about how other recordings would sound, and I think you might have played a couple of clips, mm-hmm. And showed that, he's really bringing this out. Why? Maybe for some meaning X, Y, Z, but it brings a non-pianist listener into the same world, and I think that's very important to do.
I totally agree with you. And also, I speak in hyperbole sometimes. Sure. So when I say let's get rid of program notes, of course, I'm somebody who relies heavily on the fact that people have produced extremely comprehensive histories and analyses of the things that I need to go and try to understand. So obviously there's a time and a place for the general view. Absolutely. And mm-hmm. I thank you for what you said. And it just happened just yesterday. I was looking at a comment. I do read my comments. I participate in my comments. I don't ever comment on anybody else's YouTube videos, and I probably should. I'm one of the guys who's just kind of like appreciative, but then doesn't.
I comment on yours, and hopefully I'm not too.
Yes, I do notice when you comment, and I think I write back and say, "What's up, man?" But somebody said about the most recent Yun-Chun review, because I refer to one of his inner voices as an NPC, like a non-playing character, and I also talk about something he does in the inner voice of the A minor, the Opus 10 number 2 etude, as a kind of Danny Elfman tune.
That was great.
Some guy says. Basically, it's my favorite kind of comment and it's from commenters who aren't really even initiated into the world of classical music or classical piano. And they're like, it's when you say things like that really, really help listeners like me who otherwise have no idea what's going on.
Mhm.
And in that original Rock 3 one, Elias, I didn't have an answer for what I thought that repeated note that he was banging out did. I just thought it was awesome. And
Yeah,
I was
right.
and I like headbanged to it.
Yeah,
And
headbanging
and
music.
so
Right.
it wasn't like, okay, am I now going to submit that as a thesis for why this is the greatest performance of all time? No, it might even be incongruent with something else he's doing a passage later. And maybe he should, there's actually higher levels to this. But
But it's
on some
interesting.
level,
Yeah.
it's interesting, and we need to bring back the immediate visceral response that ordinary people should be having to all the radical things happening in classical music. But there's this thick layer of, I feel like there's a thing I'm supposed to like about this, and I don't know what to listen for. And that just ruins it, and it ruins it for me when I try to enjoy other things that I don't quite understand. It's really hard. And also just the social world, the world we live in prevents this on some level. The more we can get back to immediate experiences in general with just the world around us, and that's the sensuous particulars of the fact that we're alive and we're living in color and in 3D, and there's smells and emotions and people and stuff we felt as kids. The more we can get back to that, and music can be a vehicle of quickening that and heightening that, and it can be one just really beautiful, radical, immersive way of feeling that, the better we'll be, the more we feel that. It's just the biggest tragedy is that we've become, or at least maybe I'm speaking too much for myself, I'm so numb compared to what I used to be, to even the music I love, and especially the world. I'm disenchanted in a way that leads me to not. I mean, maybe I'm just describing clinical depression. I don't know. I'm okay, guys, but you know what I mean. It's just there's a level of like,
there is a level
feel like I used to feel about this stuff, and I want to get back to that. And I kind of blame my phone, but it's a lot of things,
Yeah.
Well, there is an aspect of re-enchantment that we have to do, and I'm going to go back to what we talked about, like finding those sublime moments that just bring us back, both either in memory or for the first time, to what we love and why we love it, and then just trying to find more of those. I think the more of those we can find, man, the more the richer our lives will be.
How do we do it? Because I have to get up and go to work, and I've got a lot of deadlines, and I've got stresses, and I'm tired, and I keep checking the phone, and I don't know, putting the phone in a different room was a good first start, I guess, but I don't know.
I'm just wondering too, when
I hope
when
you
we
have an answer, Lise.
when we talk about like these experiences and being almost raw or fresh to them, and being sort of naive almost as kids, I talked with a lot of non-musicians about their experiences with classical concerts, and I've sometimes thought that they can enjoy it more than I can, because I come to it with such a judgment and such an expectation, and like I'll see someone who's maybe a famous artist. I'm like, they just either don't live up to their hype or the hype of the piece, or there's something wrong. For me, it's rare that it's perfect. I'm getting a lot better at that and trying to appreciate any little musical nuance or idea, but I think a lot of non-musicians or the laymen, whatnot, can often just go and be like, I love this. This is really beautiful, and not have the expectations that I do. I still, in my heart, think that understanding what's going on deep down inside and having experienced that and knowing the structure and following it through and knowing what's coming and how is a pianist going to tie that together, or violinist, whomever, that appreciation level really does raise the bar for me, and
But you've been
and it makes
that,
me
right?
enjoy it more.
That's not necessarily the first step. Maybe there are some people who somehow get there quickly, but even you must have
Gone through
it
steps.
took you a while to get there. I don't think
Yeah.
we began with structural listening.
Right.
We began with
Right.
moments of, like I got goosebumps by something happened, and then we're like, wait, then we realized the beauty in the art and the fact that there's incredible structural, organic compositions, and then the highest level of perceiving beautiful relationships. I mean, the other day I taught a lecture on Goldberg variations, and I was almost crying just talking about what the whole piece means once you start adding up all the details and understanding one way of understanding them, how they work together. But certainly that wasn't my first.
No,
I didn't start there.
You know what, Ben? I apologize for interrupting. I got to get this out because it's something that I kind of flashed in my head. You know, the things that this is where, when we talk about having a community or having a culture, is so important. You know, having a place where we can share these experiences, because you're right. Like where do we find a place where we can, experience these things for the first time, or again, or in a new way, that brings this stuff to life again. And it's really, like, for me, if somebody shared with me, hey, listen to this piece, or, for example, what I listened to on your podcast, listening to the Chopin Opus 62, listening to that being played in such a sublime way, like, changes my life in a real way. And I think, the more that there's a place for people to share that and say, hey, check this out, you got to look at this. And the more we're willing to open ourselves up to that and say, hey, you may not like this, but this was absolutely incredible, you got to check this out. I think we can find more and more interesting, places to find that new excitement.
I think one of the challenges, and we've talked about this before, at least in our art form, is that it is so difficult and complicated. And I don't mean to put down other art forms to say they're not as but think of just how much training we have taken to get, to where we're at. And, as dancers go through something similar, although their careers are shorter, and usually it's in the, teens to early 20s. And, but there are a lot of other art forms where they're much newer. First of all, they're much younger, and amateurs can kind of get into them pretty easily, pretty quickly, and become at least mid-level successful in those art forms, and kind of be on the inside. And I think for classical musicians to really get on the inside of that takes many years of intense training. And so that's one reason why it's seen by outsiders and even by us as elitists. We kind of want to guard that for ourselves and say, hey, we've put all this effort into it. We don't want to just release the secrets, and they're not so easy to release anyway. And so I think just trying to explain to a layman, it takes that much more effort and that much more time.
Now I think I'm thinking of chess. I think about chess again, because I'm the worst chess player in the world. I mean, if anything, how some great grandmasters have, like, they're known for, they have certain lines named after them because they sort of discovered it. I think I've discovered new ways of losing at chess. Like, that's what I should do. I'm so bad at it. But that's certainly not true. I'm sure it's just one of the obvious few, options for losing, and I pick it. But I think chess is a good example, because I'll never even begin to know what that road is like. And you do know a lot about what that's like, Elias. And it's comparable to what musicians go through, just in terms of the intensity and level of study and training and experience and repetition is enormous. And the accumulated and embodied knowledge that goes into becoming someone, with a rating in the 2000s is just seemingly insurmountable. Something like that of a virtuoso pianist training. But when I, got into, when I've had my phases, I kind of go back and forth. I'm looking at a chess.com email suddenly that just popped up now. I definitely dabble. There's a part of me which is like, feels bad because I feel like I should get even more into it. But here's what I appreciate about it. I'm not intimidated at all. I don't feel elitist at all when I'm listening to chess players talk shop. That's what I love. I love when genius masters at their craft
talk shop,
are talking in ways that I don't completely understand, because maybe I get a little bit closer to whatever it is that's going through their mind and their body when they see something that nobody else saw. And I love that. And so I wonder if, Elias, you could maybe reconcile the fact that actually all of this professional training leads to something, yes, that's on the one hand, nobody can really understands the complication of it. We don't want to dumb it down. We don't want to bring it down to
Right.
their level. But on the other hand, it's like, that might be exactly what they appreciate, is just how complicated and virtuosic the result is, and knowing that they can't just get it right away. It can actually make them want to be around it more and want to learn. I don't know, maybe that's wrong. But.
So there's a bit of a horizon effect, and I don't know where I read it or who said it, but we sort of see, the next level up, let's say, we can understand how to get to that level. We know that with practice or whatever the endeavor is, we could achieve that next level. I don't know how many levels there are. It doesn't really matter. They're kind of arbitrary. But of course, the more you learn about something, the more you realize you don't know. Of course, that's the old saying. But you can kind of see 2 levels ahead of you, but you don't know how to get there yet. But beyond that, you can't really comprehend what's going on, because you don't even know what to look for or what to see. So sometimes I do feel, if you do hear masters, let's say in a realm talking, it's kind of just cool, and maybe you hear snippets of things that you recognize, even if you don't really get what they're talking about. Like you say with the lines, maybe you're like, oh, the fact that they can actually just rattle these things off, that in and of itself is impressive enough, and it brings me in, it draws me in, and makes me think, gosh, if I could only get to the next level where I could maybe understand what they're kind of doing, even if I don't understand what they're doing, that would be really nice.
But that's where mediators and popularizers come in.
Right.
And that's whether it's Levy, Gotham Chess, or somebody else who's able to like kind of be in between us and them and say things in down-to-earth ways that on some level do capture the brilliance of what's going on without making it technical. And I think on some level that is, there is a way to do it, which still actually appeals to those who are insiders. And now I'm thinking of my own channel. I consciously try to do this. I'm always thinking of, can I make a video that Elias will like, and Joe Schmo, who is like accidentally clicked on a piano video, might like too? And it's like seemingly impossible, but as long as you come back to the fact that, hey, like people who are really good at things and others who aren't really good at the same thing, they can be in the same room. And they can relate to each other on some human level. And the fact that the music has so many human features to it, there's a lot of in routes for being like, hey, I can build bridges here between the aficionados, the insider talk, and the kind of like outsiders, maybe a little intimidated but curious. And so I think that's where there's a lot of room for more.
That's also what I'm trying to bring in, is that you almost by necessity need those people to bridge those big gaps. We just happen to have a big one, I think, in classical music. And so it's so important. And it brings me to kind of, what we've been talking about with your Yun Chun Lim analyses, and with Kevin Kenner, just kind of bringing this down to an understandable level for everybody without dumbing it down, so that I can enjoy it too. I mean, I really enjoyed the interview with him and some of the nuances that you got into that not everybody's going to pick up on, and that's fine. That's for me. That's like when you go to watch, gosh, I don't remember which Disney movie I went to watch, but or what movie it was, but I went with parents or aunts and uncles or something, and it's great for us. But then they got some inside jokes that I just didn't get at all.
Yeah.
And
or there's the people who have like theories of how Disney movies relate in this parallel in the universes and stuff, and they're watching it with that sort of like galaxy brain, and it's like, I'm just here for the music and the animation. So there are, and to think that classical music doesn't have things that everybody can relate to, like these sort of general audience movies. Classical music, a lot of it's rated G or PG. I mean, I think we should all be. There's a lot of family. It's for it's family friendly. You know what I mean?
Maybe that's the problem.
Actually, it's funny we mentioned. Oh, sorry, Mike. I'll let you go in a second. But I just had an interview with Garrick. This will come out in a few weeks. We had way too long of an episode on the Chopin Barcarolle, and by the end we were just loving it so much, and we were talking about how I mentioned that I mentioned this idea of Chopin's kind of PG. There's something very wholesome about his love scenes, in the Barcarolle, and then I related it to Liszt, because Franz Liszt is sometimes pornographic in how he depicts, this musical, representations of what we might think of as sexcapades, for example, and so. It's funny that maybe Liszt is, in that sense, not meant for the whole family. But of course it is, because at the end of the day, it's just music. And the kid listening doesn't have to be thinking in such explicit R-rated terms. But anyway, that's just a stupid aside. But yeah,
I love it. Well, you know what, I wanted to mention your podcast, the Chopin Podcast. Also, please talk about your relationship with the Chopin Foundation of the United States and what you're going to be doing in January.
Well, I'm just really lucky that they reached out to me in part because I made a lot of stuff for Tonebase and the YouTube channel in particular that they liked, and they were looking for somebody to host their live streams, that, you know, somebody to interview the competitors and maybe sometimes the judges for the internet audience for their YouTube channel live streams. And you know, they do this every few years. It's become a thing at competitions now. You see this kind of person. And so they reached out to me and asked me to do it. And so I'm sitting there recently happily unemployed. You know, I'm excited about my new projects, but I don't really have anything going on. So I'm looking at everything as an opportunity. So I wrote back to them and said, sure, I'll do it, but you're going to need to raise the numbers on your YouTube channel if you want anybody to be watching these things. And we need to get, you know, the word out there about this competition. So what if I made a podcast about Chopin and you sponsored it? Basically, you paid me to make that. Right. And it's a kind of like, we both benefit from that. And that's exactly what's happening. Of course, I'm practically doubling the size of the thing, and, you know, we're going to need a. I mean, I don't know how to draw lines for myself. It was one good thing about Tonebase is at least they help draw lines for me, but I tend to just go overboard with all my projects. So, but at least this one is fun because, like, I'm doing something I would have done anyway, but it's also part of a partnership where I'm not being like restricted or narrowed at all. It's all very directly related. It's more than, you know, most competitions could dream of having in terms of publicity, to sort of popular podcast, which is directly about and leading up to this competition, which is the celebration around Chopin in Miami in January. And so, of course, now I have to extend the podcast past it, but maybe I'll profile one of the winners or something. You know, there's ways that this could work out. So what'll be cool is
we get a whole other year to Warsaw. So, you know,
I've already something very problematic happened on my call with Garrett last, and that's that I started talking about, well, what if we do a Beethoven podcast next? What if we do a Brahms podcast? And it's just like, is this going to be the rest of my life? Is that going to be 32 episodes of Beethoven podcast? Yeah. So, but so long as I don't have anybody giving me money to do that, it won't happen. But in any case, I'll be in Miami. I'm going to be interviewing and sort of profiling the competitors, trying to, I don't know, I'm still thinking about it, actually. I hope anyone listening who's curious, tune in to see whatever I come up with. But I want to make it, I want to do some novel things. I want to try to do some of the things we're talking about, like whoever's watching, kind of make it about what we are about to hear or what we just heard. Maybe, and so one way I'm doing this is I am going to make an extra video that's part of my partnership with the foundation, in which I interview all of the competitors just very briefly and have them share one pivotal or ecstatic moment. A favorite moment is a, you know, kind of vanilla way of saying it, but some moment from their Chopin program, whichever round, just a measure or a passage, or just, it needs to be short, that does it for them, that's always spoken to them, or that they're really excited about performing, or whatever their criteria is, and having them share that. And then I'll put them together in a series of quick shorts where they share their moments, you know. And so I hope that whets the appetites and gets people thinking about these things we're talking about, where it's like, oh, I liked what that one kid said about the Polonaise Fantasy. I want to hear his performance and see what he does with it, or what others playing that same piece, because everybody has to play it who makes the finals, what they do when they get there, you know. So just trying to use some of these techniques we've been discussing and seeing how to employ them both before the competition and then when I'm there, maybe following up on some of those specifics, so that, yes, on some level I'm getting really picky and nerdy and I'm talking about really detailed things, which you're seemingly not supposed to do when you're trying to broadcast something, but doing it in a way that, you know, when a sports analysis gets very detailed for popular audiences, as they say, here's the route this receiver is running, and this is how this formation didn't get. So I think
about how skating is done, you know, how
it's all about the detail, right? And so I don't know what kind of, I have a meeting this coming week about the technology that I'll have at my disposal and what sort of resources I'll have. So I don't know if I can realize all the sort of crazy fantasies I have of possibility. Because really, I want to be like, I would love to have a score that I'm like live annotating, but probably, I'd love to review the tape with them, things like that. Like, I don't have a team there like ready to cut the tape and show replay or anything like that. So maybe we build to that, but at least, I just want to do a little bit more and try to bring some of this like enthusiasm for details, but in a way that like, gets people listening and engaging. It doesn't seem too esoteric or nerdy. See if I can bring that and bring some spirit to the competition, while also just celebrating the achievement of all these young pianists. What the ones even who are eliminated are, beyond anything I ever achieved with Chopin. And I could never feel like I never got into that competition. So at the same time, we need to be just celebrating the fact that these people are doing this, that anybody is doing this, that 16 and 17 and 18 and 20-year-olds are still dedicating their lives to this music. And so I'll try to do a little bit of all of this. We'll see. But this is, for me, what my partnership with the Chopin Foundation is all about, is we both have this, we share a mission to try to make Chopin, to make good on this universalizing promise and bring Chopin's music, but ultimately, I think classical music in general, to more people, however we can. They have their MO, and they have their competition and their magazines and concerts and their way of doing it. I have my YouTube channel. I have my way of doing it. So at least we can cross paths and team up in this one moment in time and maybe do something a little bit larger than we would have been able to do just on our own.
Well, I'll tell you, at school, I teach, and I sometimes play some of your videos if we have time in class, or a snippet of something or an analysis. And it's nice because, these kids are from age 10 to 18, and a few of them have private lessons, but a lot don't. Their entire experience with piano is just class piano. And it's like, they don't even know what the Chopin competition is, or the Van Cliburn competition is, or what goes on in that world. And so to see someone kind of relate it in a funny way, and believe me, sometimes they don't find all your jokes funny. I do. But then again, I'm super old to them, and everything I say.
You also influenced my humor, so I'm basically making jokes for you.
Right. I know. And that hurts me even more, because the things I start to say, I'm like, they just cringe when I say, talk in their lingo. That's totally fine. But they do kind of associate something with what you say, and they resonate. What you say resonates with them, and then they can be attracted to a piece or hear something in it that they haven't heard before. And, can I play that piece? I'm like, well, it's a little bit too hard, but you can work through it.
But I love that they want to,
But just that desire and that love is already a big step, because, we in classical music, we have such a this standoffishness with, like, students will come to me or whomever, you too, I'm sure, and they say, look, I don't want to be a concert pianist, but. And I was like, don't worry, I don't want you to or expect you to become one either.
What I tell them is, I'm barely even one. Don't worry about it.
Right? That's right. I mean, nobody goes to a soccer coach or a football coach and is like, look, my kid's doing this for fun. Don't play them a lot on the field. They're not going to make all the practice. They're not going to run as hard as everybody. They're not going to the NFL. It's like, no crap. I'm not, of course I'm not going to the NFL, but they're going to play their hardest with me. So anyway, I think you're doing a great service in general, really not to make your head go too big.
No, thank you. That really means a lot to hear that. And also, you made me realize I swore earlier. I said a dirty word, so you'll have to bleep that out.
It's just me. I'm around kids all the time, so I just have
okay.
Well, I realized maybe this is for general audiences, so I said the SH word.
It is. This is for general audiences. Look at Mike. He is.
This isn't like Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody. I mean, this is something more
Chopin.
It's or like this is like a nice little Mozart. Actually, Mozart could get. Yes. Never mind. What is the most G-rated music? That's a good question.
Anyway. You know what? We'll put that on the
John Field.
There you go.
That's right. The John Field Nocturnes. That was a great interview with John O'Connor.
Oh, well, yeah.
That was
John O'Connor's fun.
Yeah. We've had him on too. He's awesome.
Oh, really?
He's Ben, I don't want to cut this any shorter. Like, I really want to keep this thing going on. So maybe I'll have you on again. I would love to have you on again. This has been such a great conversation.
I enjoyed it. It was so cool to catch up with Elias, but also just to talk and meet with you, Mike. And if any of this I don't know if it needs to make sense, but if this resonated with anybody,
a dialogue.
I think it's just we touched on a lot of important things to me, and hopefully seems like to you, and hopefully to other people too. So
yeah, me too. Well,
Yeah,
thank you
it was
so
great.
much. I really appreciate your work again, and thanks for coming on. And If Love Remains.
thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks, Elias.
Thanks.
Mike is gone.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
Gone but not forgotten.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Leavitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.
Speak peace like a Buddhist.